in their own mouths, thus making a kind of sweet bath in which the larva lies. In 5 or 6 days the larva grows so fat upon this that it nearly fills the cell, and then the bees seal up the mouth of the cell with a thin cover of wax made of little rings and with a tiny hole in the centre. As soon as the larva is covered in, it begins to give out from its underlip a whitish silken film made of 2 threads of silk glued together, and with this it spins a covering or cocoon all round itself, and so it remains for about 10 days more. At last, just 21 days after the egg was laid, the young bee is quite perfect, lying in the cell as in figure 57, and she begins to eat her way through the cocoon and through the waxen lid, and scrambles out of her cell. Then the nurses come again to her, stroke her wings, and feed her for 24 hours, and after that she is quite ready to begin work, and flies out to gather honey and pollen like the rest of the workers. By this time the number of working bees in the hive is becoming very great, and the storing of honey and pollen dust goes on very quickly. Even the empty cells which the young bees have left are cleaned out by the nurses and filled with honey, and this honey is darker than that stored in clean cells, and which we always call virgin honey because it is so pure and clear. At last, after 6 weeks, the queen leaves off laying worker eggs and begins to lay in some rather larger cells eggs from which drones or male bees will grow up in about 20 days. Meanwhile the worker bees have been building on the edge of the cones some very curious cells, Q figure 57, which look like thimbles hanging with the open side upwards, and about every 3 days the queen stops in laying drone eggs and goes to put an egg in one of these cells. Notice that she waits 3 days between each of these peculiar layings, because we shall see presently that there is a good reason for her doing so. The nursing bees take great care of these eggs, and instead of putting ordinary food into the cell, they fill it with a sweet, pungent jelly, for this larva is to become a princess and a future queen bee. Curiously enough, it seems to be the peculiar food and the size of the cell which makes the larva grow into a mother bee which can lay eggs. For if a hive has the misfortune to lose its queen, they take one of the ordinary worker larvae and put it into a royal cell and feed it with jelly, and it becomes a queen bee. As soon as the princess is shut in like the others, she begins to spin her cocoon, but she does not quite close it as the other bees do, but leaves a hole at the top. At the end of 16 days, after the first royal egg was laid, the eldest princess begins to try to eat her way out of her cell, and about this time the old queen becomes very uneasy and wanders about distractedly. The reason of this is that there can never be 2 queen bees in one hive, and the queen knows that her daughter will soon be coming out of her cradle and will try to turn her off her throne. So, not wishing to have to fight for her kingdom, she makes up her mind to seek a new home and take a number of her subjects with her. If you watch the hive about this time, you will notice many of the bees clustering together after they have brought in their honey, and hanging patiently in order to have plenty of wax ready to use when they start, while the queen keeps a sharp lookout for a bright sunny day on which they can swarm. For bees will never swarm on a wet or doubtful day if they can possibly help it, and we can easily understand why, when we consider how the rain would clog their wings and spoil the wax under their bodies. Meanwhile, the young princess grows very impatient, and tries to get out of her cell, but the worker bees drive her back, for they know there would be a terrible fight if the two queens met. So they close up the hole she has made with fresh wax, after having put in some food for her to live upon till she is released. At last a suitable day arrives, and about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning the old queen leaves the hive, taking with her about 2,000 drones and from 12,000 to 20,000 worker bees, which fly a little way, clustering round her, till she alights on the bough of some tree, and then they form a compact swarm ready for a new hive or to find a home of their own. Leaving them to go their way, we will now return to the old hive. Here the liberated princess is reigning in all her glory. The worker bees crowd round her, watch over her, and feed her as though they could not do enough to show her honour. But still she is not happy. She is restless, and runs about as if looking for an enemy, and she tries to get at the remaining royal cells where the other young princesses are still shut in. But the workers will not let her touch them, and at last she stands still and begins to beat the air with her wings and to tremble all over, moving more and more quickly till she makes quite a loud piping noise. Hark! What is that note answering her? It is a low, hoarse sound, and it comes from the cell of the next eldest princess. Now we see why the young queen has been so restless. She knows her sister will soon come out, and the louder and stronger the sound becomes within the cell, the sooner she knows the fight will have to begin. And so she makes up her mind to follow her mother's example, and to lead off a second swarm. But she cannot always stop to choose a fine day, for her sister is growing very strong, and may come out of her cell before she is off. And so the second or after swarm gets ready and goes away. And this explains why princesses' eggs are laid a few days apart, for if they were laid all on the same day, there would be no time for one princess to go off with a swarm before the other came out of her cell. Sometimes, when the workers are not watchful enough, two queens do meet, and then they fight till one is killed. Or sometimes they both go off with the same swarm without finding each other out, but this only delays the fight till they get into the new hive. Sooner or later one must be killed. And now a third queen begins to reign in the old hive, and she is just as restless as the preceding ones, for there are still more princesses to be born. But this time, if no new swarm wants to start, the workers do not try to protect the royal cells. The young queen darts at the first she sees, gnaws a hole with her jaws, and thrusting in her sting through the hole in the cocoon, kills the young bee while it is still a prisoner. She then goes to the next and the next, and never rests till all the young princesses are destroyed. Then she is contented, for she knows no other queen will come to dethrone her. After a few days she takes her flight in the air with the drones, and comes home to settle down in the hive for the winter. Then a very curious scene takes place. The drones are no more use, for the queen will not fly out again, and these idle bees will never do any work in the hive. So the worker bees begin to kill them, falling upon them and stinging them to death. And as the drones have no stings, they cannot defend themselves, and in a few days there is not a drone, nor even a drone egg, left in the hive. This massacre seems very sad to us, since the poor drones have never done any harm beyond being hopelessly idle. But it is less sad when we know that they could not live many weeks, even if they were not attacked, and with winter coming the bees cannot afford